Welcome to another Alia Graphic Creator Chat. I'm James, and today I'm joined by two absolutely wonderful people, Jessica Walton and Aśka. And together they co-created an incredible comic called Stars in Their Eyes through Fremantle Press. And that's been available since October last year. I think that's right. Yeah. So Jessica is a queer disabled writer whose writing credits include the picture book Introducing Teddy, several short stories for kids and teens, and poetry, which has been collected in anthologies such as Growing Up Disabled in Australia and The Other F Word. They also co-wrote an episode of the TV show Get Crackin', which was focused on disability. And Aśka is an energetic visual storyteller, comic maker, and science communicator who has illustrated a range of books for children of all ages, produced some extremely interesting science comics, and has travelled Western Australia and I think the world running shows and workshops about illustration, visual literacy, and science. And some of these were done through SciTech.
And privately, yeah.
And privately, yep. And Aśka also has the most wonderful way of describing the diacritic in her name of the little line above the letter S changes the sound to that of running water, which I think is the most wonderful way I've ever heard that a diacritic described. So have I missed anything? You both have such wonderful long... No? Okay.
You got it.
So great. So we might start by asking what got you interested in comics to start with. And Jessica, you got to go first, being listed on the book. So we might go with Aśka first for the interview. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Me. Oh, right. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think, I'm a visual person. Like I feel like it's chosen me rather than I chose it. And so in my head, there's always a cartoon or a comic going on. And no matter what situation or problem, I see it visually. So I think I was drawn naturally to these books. And actually, I grew up on a very cool series of I guess they were comics done by this guy called Tadeusz Baranowski. I grew up in Poland and everything was very dire. It was... pretty much, behind the Iron Curtain. And there were these really, really cool comics. I think I still have one here. And they are awesome. Not just because Baranowski's style is really psychedelic, but the idea that the characters are very aware of them in the book. So they interact with the panels, they interact with the idea of crossing pages, ripping through, folding, and also the maker themselves and the hand. And I think that allowed me to really get an idea of like there's no rules, you can do what you like, and breaking that fourth wall when I'm just starting to read and realizing this is going to be awesome. So I think that was my real introduction.
That's good. Do you know if those are available in English or?
Oh, absolutely not. And I think they're really not PC anymore, I suppose.
Oh, okay.
Could be one of the issues, but they're really wonderfully creative, and fantastic for their time. It's really late 80s that they were created, so late 70s, early 80s, yeah.
Fair enough. So, Jess, what about you?
Well, I've always read graphic novels, so I never really thought of myself as being someone who would create one. But I was, I started my journey as a picture book author, and that was kind of writing what I needed for my kids. And then I was invited to write a short story for an anthology, and I was keen to try my hand at every kind of writing. So I thought, okay, I'll try a short story. And that got into the anthology, and then I had a go at poetry through a fellowship and TV writing when I was approached to do that. So basically anytime any kind of writing comes up that I haven't done before, I think, I'm going to give this a go. And I was lucky enough that Fremantle approached me about turning the short story I'd written for that anthology into a graphic novel. And so I was really excited about that because I had read so many graphic novels. I really loved the Lumberjane series and the Steven Universe graphic novels, and I read a lot of junior fiction graphic novels with my own kids. So yeah, I was really excited when they asked me to do that, and then to get to work with someone like Aśka was just incredible. And I learned a lot. I'm sure that you know, most people when they're doing graphic novels for the first time, you know, it's a learning process, and I didn't even know how to kind of set out the writing for something like that. So I was very lucky to work with Fremantle and Aśka because they knew a lot about what to do and were able to kind of help me through that process and you know, working out what to do.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So what about libraries? How much have you both had to do with libraries? Both as far as with this book and just generally. Jess?
My first job was in a library shelving books, and I really loved it because it was such a beautiful space, and I'd always come home with a huge pile of books from the library after work. And, you know, I spent a lot of time in the library at school as well. I had cancer as a kid, and when I sort of came back to school, I didn't really know how to fit in, and the librarian at primary school really helped me to kind of feel safe in the library, and she'd recommend different books. And actually, she was one of the people I dedicated my first picture book to because she was such a huge part of the books that I ended up reading, and that feeling the books were kind of my safe space and my escape when I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed at school. So yeah, libraries have always been a really special and magical place for me, and I love taking my kids there because I can jump in my wheelchair and within 5 minutes I'm at my local library. The kids can choose books. I can, you know, bring home some graphic novels for them to read. They can have a play because there's always great activities to do at the library. Yeah, I really love libraries.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Similarly for me, I mean, I grew up in the 90s in, you know, country New South Wales. So the thing to do for me was to go to the library and read all the age inappropriate books, and who was going to stop me? You know, that was great. Like, it was the world before the internet that you got to explore, and encyclopedias and things. That's how you Google things, and photocopiers. So I love that. But now today, you know, librarians are the people who actually make my industry run. When you think about children's book publishing and how they reach their audiences, it is the libraries and the librarians who work so hard to promote it. That's how I can make my living, you know, because I get those incursions and talks, not just during book week. And also a librarian can reach so many teachers if they're in one school, on so many schools if they're in a city or a town library. So yeah, they're like an amazing network of people who work very hard behind the scenes to really make it all happen for us. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, and what about for this book in particular? How much have you had to do with libraries for Stars in Their Eyes and the development, promotion, all of that sort of stuff?
We actually did the Melbourne launch of Stars in Their Eyes online through my local library, Pakenham Library. And so that was really special to be able to do that with them, particularly because so many events during lockdown had kind of switched to online. And there was a big, amazing launch happening in WA. And so to be able to then do an online event as well, which a lot of people who are housebound or staying at home because of COVID, or who maybe can't get out because of their kids, or who are too far away from any of the launches, could just log on online and join in that way. So I have really loved that aspect of lockdowns, the access that I've suddenly got to all of these events. And so to do that through my local library was really special. Yeah,
that's great. So with this book, what drove you both to work on the story, and then what brought you together to create it? So it started as a short story from you, Jess, and then became the other. So we might start with you for this one.
Yeah, so it started in the anthology Meet Me at the Intersection from Fremantle Press, which is an amazing collection of really great voices, which are kind of underrepresented in the publishing industry. So in published books. So that was kind of the idea of the anthology, was to bring together underrepresented voices. And so I really was so honoured to be in that, because it was my first time trying to write a short story. And I had a lot of trouble doing it because I really wanted to write someone like me as a main character. And I guess I hadn't read a lot of books with someone like me as a main character. So it was a bit of a process of kind of sending something to Fremantle, and then Emmeline Quay-Mulliner, who was working with me on kind of editing it, would, you know, give me some feedback. And then I kept going through this thing where I'd say, you know, oh, it's no good, I've got to pull it. And Emmeline would get in touch and be like, no, it's great, we love it, keep it in the anthology, you know, you've got to publish it. So Fremantle were really good at helping me as an emerging writer to kind of keep it in there. And yeah, I guess the drive behind it was to have someone who is disabled and queer, who has chronic pain and anxiety, and has one leg, you know, to be at the center of a story, and also to have a romance, because I really feel like there's not a lot of that happening in Australian literature at the moment. But there are some amazing books coming through in terms of disability rep. So I'm lucky that I'm kind of writing into this kind of group project where we're all writing ourselves in. But yeah, that was what I wanted to do with the short story. And then Fremantle took it from that to a graphic novel, which was amazing.
Oh, yeah, because
Aśka, did you want to?
Yeah, that's how it works in the publishing industry with you know, visuals and art, is that the publisher chooses who's going to work together. It's very rare that the artists get to approach a publisher and have the collaborations approved, because ultimately the publisher sees the vision for how they're going to market the book, what is trending, you know, and they have an idea of what they want it to look like and feel like, and that's how they kind of pair people up. So I suppose, yeah, that's how we met, because the publisher kind of brought us together. Yeah. But yeah, I was sent the short story from the anthology, and at that point, Kate, the editor and publisher, said, you know, what do you think you'd be interested in working on it? And I remember really liking it because of Maisie. Like, there's something about Maisie that really resonates with me, because I think I was trying to explain this the other day. It's like, for me as a kid, I was a weird kid, but I was also very stubborn about not changing. So there was this front of like, this is who I am, but then there's this anxiety at the same time, knowing that you're going to be met, you know, with adversity. And I think Maisie has the same thing for different reasons, but it's that duality of like, I'm standing up for who I am, but also it is really stressful to do that. Oh, so I'm so sorry. I'll be right back. But
and then being able to work with Aśka on, you know, I would basically, I tried to kind of create a script of the words that have been in the short story. So I had to strip away everything that wasn't dialogue and create like a script. So it felt a little bit like when we're working on, you know, on a TV script type thing, you know, it's all about the voices, and then, or that at least my side of it was, and then giving it to Aśka, who really created this incredible atmosphere and environment and brought the characters to life in a way that I never could have imagined, and that the words can't do by themselves. So I often talk about this scene in the book that Aśka drew where you're getting a bird's eye view of all of the stalls at the FanCon. And there's something about looking down on them all and seeing how busy and hectic it is. It really like almost made me feel anxious. Like, it's a beautiful illustration, but it really shows how Maisie might be feeling in that environment, just so overwhelmed by the noise and the people, and yeah, and that's something that you can't do with words. So it was so beautiful to kind of capture that. So yeah, as an author, it's just such a privilege to be able to be part of a partnership where, you know, it really the artwork creates something totally new in conjunction with the words.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's like a real interesting challenge in if you're a writer, or, you know, you approach normally things from writing stories or books, and now you're asking to strip something down to dialogue, which is, you know, essentially what a screenplay is. It's dialogue, so the characters are condensed in what they're saying, and then the rest of it is just maybe stage directions. And then the rest of the story, which normally would be written by the writer, you know, with the descriptions and the emotive things and the internal monologues and the maybe descriptions of how the characters are feeling physically, that's being then written by someone else, right? So that's why, like, it's such a collaborative process where I'm kind of like taking it and yeah, doing the emotive stuff. Like, that's the thing that's gonna make it, I guess, package it into that medium of comics.
And Aśka was really, oh, sorry. Aśka was so committed to working through how to represent disability accurately. So it was really amazing being able to send some short videos of how I get up and down from a chair, get in and out of a car, even just walking. And I didn't see these until later, Aśka, but she'd drawn these incredible reference drawings from those videos showing my movement, and then translating that into Maisie's character. And I can't tell you what it's like reading that book and seeing myself visually, physically represented on the page. So to have that kind of collaborative conversation through artwork about how I move and how I move through the world was really special, and I think totally unique with this process of creating a graphic novel.
Yeah, of course. And again, like doing the visual storytelling, the movement of the characters is part of the language that I have to use. So there is no way that I could even try to approach doing it without the authenticity. So I was really grateful that when I suggested to Jess to get some videos made, because videos are the truth, photos are the posed lies. You always make yourself look a particular way because that's the way we're trained, whereas videos show you the real thing. And I wasn't sure because it's quite a vulnerable thing to ask, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen to these videos. So I was really grateful for that, because that was instrumental in making me understand, how I could taste it.
I don't think I could do it without that. Again, I think now that I've been through that process, I think anytime I would, write a story about someone like me, I would need that to be part of the process to get that across accurately. So it was really special and amazing.
That's great. So it does speak to something that I know Aśka was saying to me before the interview about one of the things that has frustrated you is when you're just referred to as an illustrator, and you've really co-created this together, and that really came through in that answer there. So yeah. And on that thing of collaboration, how do you, with all these disparate elements, how do you then bring it together and make sure it's a cohesive whole? So you're saying you're Jess working on the dialogue, and then Aśka's working on the movement and all of that. How do you then make sure that they're working together?
Aśka, you can take this one. Yeah.
I'm the comic maker. So basically I was supplied the screenplay, the text, and then went off and worked for 3 months to create like the really rough bones of what the comic would feel like. And this is where I could just pause and say, so the difference between illustrating and comic making is that, illustrations are the images that capture a particular moment. So if you have a picture book, you've got spreads, and you might have 1, 2, 3 illustrations per spread that capture that text. But with this comic that you have there, that's over 1,000 illustrations in that comic, if you count them as single images. So you see another problem emerges. How do you organize these images? Because comics are sequential art. That's the other dimension that it doesn't exist in illustrating books, which is the designing of how the book is going to be paced through layout, basically evolution of panels, the pacing of words, and also what is in each panel. Where do we slow down? Where do we speed up? Where do we grab the reader? Where do we want him to be scared or in love? How do we want to manipulate their feelings? And this is what you're doing, the kind of like building the structural engineering before you start drawing. And I think this is kind of answering a question, like that's kind of where you try to plan how you're going to weave the things together. And then when that got approved, I spent another like 8 or 9 months actually doing the final rendering of everything, and then coalescing it. But yeah, I think essentially that's how it looked.
Okay. So getting into the book itself, one of the things that really drew me into the story was the way hands tell so much of the narrative, and they convey panic and isolation, and they convey joy and connection, and reveal a lot about the state of mind of the characters. And this is very much highlighted by many panels that focus almost entirely on the hands. Was this something you knew you wanted to do from the start, or did it develop through the process of creating the comic?
Well, for me, I think, because Jess's characters were so vivid, I imagined them as people, like they were kind of formed in my mind. And I could see that these young teenagers, especially, when they're talking and they're meeting someone, and Maisie, for example, being quite anxious, I could imagine what I do with my hands when I get anxious, and it was just that translation of motion into the characters. Now, another thing, like when you consider this book, it's a character-driven drama. there is no action per se in it, right? Like there's no car chases, no one's like running anywhere, there's no adventure stories. Basically, people are sitting and talking, or they're walking and talking from a couch to a chair. So if you just show people sitting and talking, or heads talking, that's extremely unexciting visually. So the attack challenge then is, how do you get those characters visually engaging you? And in a conversation, that's what happens. Your whole body talks. And that's why I am so interested in, what are the hands doing? What are the feet doing? Which angle are we looking at? And that really adds to you being there with the characters and having that chat with them and getting really close, personal, and emotional. Right, that's kind of what we wanted with that book. So,
and is that how you had pictured it, Jess, or was it an amazing surprise for you when you saw these the hands being so communicative?
I think talking about Maisie's anxiety is the perfect kind of into this conversation, because when I get really anxious, it is a whole body experience. And when I was reading and kind of taking in all of this beautiful artwork, I could see Maisie's anxiety physically on the page, and I could almost feel it with her. So, I think the hands and also the facial expressions and just the way that, that Aśka is able to kind of create, to kind of show what's happening inside the body without any words, is incredible. So, when she was kind of, her hands were sort of playing with it, her hands were kind of doing what I do when I'm having anxiety. And I think there's one where she's sort of dissociating and looking down at her hands. And that, really spoke to me. So I think as an author who is not a visual artist, there's this incredible moment where you've already given over your words, and then you get this beautiful artwork back. And I've had this experience with introducing Teddy, and then again with Stars in Their Eyes, and particularly with Stars in Their Eyes, because something kind of new has been created, and so much of it is visual art, where this thing that you've seen in your head is kind of on the page, but it's also something totally new and totally unexpected and beyond what you could have imagined. So whether it's the hands or the scenes looking down on the stalls, or the swimming pool and the way that the water moves as Maisie moves through the water, I was just in love. I was very emotional reading it. I was overwhelmed by how perfect it was, and it was beyond anything I had in my mind when I gave over those words. Very lucky. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, the swimming pool is an interesting one. I one that stuck to me is the moment that she's surfacing, and the surface tension hasn't yet been broken.
Yes,
it was a beautiful, beautiful moment.
And that scene is so important to me. So the way the water moved and the way it kind of protected her from the outside world, and the ableism that she was about to experience was just and then breaking through and kind of seeing this person kind of looking down, this patronizing. It was just so perfect. So and that is a real experience that has happened many times. So it was maybe not exactly that way, but many, many variations on a theme. So that scene was so beautifully captured.
And on a side note, I have been using this scene, the few pages from the comic, without any words, with classes, and saying, what do you think's happening? And when you get that scene in the end, where the ladies giving her the first, oh my gosh, you're so inspirational, and there's no words, but you can see her body language. And I ask the students, what do you think she's saying there? Like, because clearly this interaction is not something Maisie wants. And this is when they get it, they get what is this thing that they could say that is actually, inappropriate, but, well-meaning. And so, it's really interesting that the power of that visual revelation, I suppose, to the reader who might not be, from the position of Maisie's character.
Yeah, when I wrote that scene, I was just trying to communicate this thing that really happens to me, and to try and show how unpleasant it is and how common it is, the comment with the mum about, making the cards with Stella Young's, linked to Stella Young's speech on it. I really wanted to communicate what that feels like, but I hadn't really thought about its application in an educational space. And I'm a teacher, a casual relief teacher. I go into primary and high schools, and every time I meet a new class of kids, we have a conversation about disability because they can see my leg. And so I'm always talking to them about disability and ableism and all that sort of thing, and how to interact with a disabled person appropriately and politely and kindly. And and so to imagine Aśka like in a classroom with that book talking to kids about disability and how to talk to people, that is an amazing thing. I hadn't really anticipated that, and it makes my teacher heart pretty happy. So I can't wait to run a workshop with some kids on it and maybe unpack that scene a little bit with them as well.
That's great. That leads really interesting. What you said about Stella Young and the mum mentioning getting the cards made up, and there's also throughout the book Maisie wears a t-shirt with the words "the future is accessible" on it, which is an actual item in the real world outside of the there we go. And that's created by Annie Sagara.
Yes.
And you took that real world item and included that in the story as well. How important was it for you both to include these parts of real world activism in the story? So the Stella Young, the Annie Sagara, and I'm sure others that I haven't mentioned here, but were worked in.
Very important. The Cara Bufano, the amputee that Maisie looks up to, is a nod to Lisa Bufano, who is an amputee dancer and who was very important to me in terms of taking on an identity as a disabled person and being proud of my body. And so there are lots of little nods throughout to disabled activists and creators and artists. And I think that's just because that's what my world is. I'm surrounded by all of these amazing people who, I was a disabled kid who didn't even really know I was disabled, that I had this community waiting for me, this identity, this sense of pride waiting for me, that I was connected to a history of activism and arts, and that all of that was just right there waiting for me, and that I just hadn't connected to it. So when I was in my early 30s, I started, which is, not that long ago, I started finding out about that basically through social media, and started connecting to other disabled people. And it changed the way that I felt about myself and about my place in the world, and about what I wanted to do with my life. And that was really special. But there's also, I think, a grief when adult disabled people come to that identity and that community and that history late in life, because you realize how much you needed it when you were younger. So the idea that there are teenagers who might be reading this story and seeing themselves, hopefully, and maybe connecting with that identity is really amazing to me. So what I would hope is that maybe they might look up Stella Young or look up Annie Sagara or, find out about Lisa Bufano and kind of tap into that world as well. Yeah.
And how about you, Aśka? Was there instances like that you felt were really important to get in as well?
I think I learned a lot from Jess's script. Like, I Googled everything in there. I'm actually there's a lot of things I didn't know, and even things like Steven Universe. I've never seen it because it's like the wrong age demographic, and I don't have kids in my house. So things like that really opened my eyes to how the new generation is seeing things like gender and equality and diversity, and that really excited me as well. So I delved into it all, and but yeah, this is definitely Jess's kind of addition to this creation is that they've got that the incentive to really teach us with that kind of feeling like it's an education. It's more of a conversation and a fun thing to read, but we're learning a lot about this world, the real world. Right?
I'm so excited you found out about the Steven Universe through this. I'm like, yes.
That's amazing.
Basically, all I talk about is Shira and Steven Universe and books. So I'm just like, if I can get some of that across through this book, then that's a huge win.
Yes, that's perfectly understandable. Sharon and Steven Universe are amazing too. So yeah. So on the subject of fanning, going absolutely crazy fan on things, in the book, Maisie, one of the ones that she particularly wants from the FanCon experience is meeting Cara Bufano, who you were mentioning before. And she's an actor who is queer and has a similar disability to Maisie. And you've already touched on this a bit, but how important it just is this representation to young people, and in our real world, at the world outside of Stars in Your Eyes, how well is it actually being managed?
I think things are getting a lot better. But I mean, anytime there's any kind of analysis of diversity in literature, you know, it's never as good as it should be. So I think publishing in particular has a long way to go. You know, the people who are making the decisions about what gets published, you know, they're really important, because as soon as you have someone who knows about what it's like to be a part of one of these underrepresented communities kind of at the helm making the decisions, I think that really changes things. And also having publishers who are really open to working with people from those communities and who are open to learning about it is really great. So I was really lucky with Fremantle Press, because everyone there is so committed to, you know, improving you know, getting underrepresented authors published, basically, and artists as well, and kind of getting those stories into the mainstream publishing world. So yeah, I think publishing is a huge part of making sure that we have representation in literature. That is important. I know it's important because the first time I read a book with someone like me, I remember just bawling as I was reading, because it was happiness at finding it, but also grief at realizing that, you know, younger me didn't have that experience of seeing myself on the page. So yeah, I guess with Maisie, I wanted to show again what that how important it is. You know, she's got this one person who represents her, and she's been fangirling over that person for such a long time, and that this is a real dream to see someone like her. Yeah. And that's my experience, is just yearning for that representation. So, yeah. And also Ollie is, you know, really keen to not feel alone, to connect to others, to find community, to find representation. And so I'm trying to get that across.
So what can libraries do to help improve this situation of it's getting better, but it still has a long way to go? How can libraries help?
Celebrating those books, having displays. I've seen some incredible displays. I've seen a lot of really great LGBTI book displays, LGBTIQA+, sorry, but I haven't seen a lot of like displays of disability representation. So I'd love to see more of that, particularly books written by disabled creators. And yeah, I think that would be a really a wonderful thing. And I'd love to see more graphic novel displays too, and I've seen some amazing ones. But, you know, there are so many great voices kind of writing into graphic novels and comics in Australia at the moment. So yeah, I'd really love those voices to be celebrated too.
Yeah, and I guess more independent comics too, you know, like that would be nice. I know it's probably difficult for certain libraries when you're not really not sure where to look. But I think that's where Ali could help, you know, have some sort of lists of different sources of where you can source your books from. Published books tend to go through a certain filter. So they've already been out in the community and they've had certain level of success, and then publishers pick it up and publish it. But just so much cool stuff, even like just in Perth alone, where I am. And I imagine it's the same in Melbourne and Sydney, where there's all these really great, and they're all like individualized voices of very specific people with their specific view of the world. And that enriches, you know, the kids' experience who go and pick it up. And then it avoids being that thing where people associate comics with just one genre, because that's what is the easiest thing to buy. You know, there's so much comics can do, right? It can be, yeah.
I've also seen some great displays where they're like, if you like this book, you like this book. And I think that's a great way to show, like you might have like the Treehouse books that are very popular with kids. And you might have something like where, you know, you say, if you like this book, you might really like, you know, the Olga books by Elise Grover, which are kind of illustrated fiction, or, you know, the Real Pigeons books by a Melbourne duo. You know, you've got, yeah, I think you can get those books into kids' hands by kind of saying, oh, you liked that? you'll really like this. And I think that's something librarians already do an incredible job of. But yeah, I love those kinds of displays. Or I also love the little notes that some librarians write, like little reviews of the books that they love, and have it underneath the shelf where the book is. I think that's really effective and really cute, and helps kids to connect to books. So doing that for some Own Voices disability books would be really amazing.
Do you have suggestions? So you both talked about getting these books into libraries that aren't necessarily in the mainstream. Do you have suggestions for people who are interested in getting those books into libraries about good places to start looking?
Yes. I'm like, let me bring out my pile of books. I'm just wondering if I have any that have disabled characters here. There's an amazing one called Dead Endia, which is a great example of a graphic novel with disability representation. That's probably my favourite at the moment. This one is not so much about disability representation, but it's a junior fiction graphic novel called Pizza and Taco that I'm obsessed with at the moment. There are great queer graphic novels like Princess Ever After, which is really sweet. I've got so many here. Aśka, do you have any? Are we talking specific books or ways to get those books?
I was more talking ways to get those books, but specific books are great too.
I was like, let me show books. Sorry.
No, don't apologise. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ways to get them in. Okay. Well, I think, talking to Alia, talking with other librarians. I know that Alia has a graphic novel book club, so initiatives like that are a really great way to find out about new books that are out there. Looking at lists that have been made recommending books is great. And maybe even asking, graphic novel authors, do you know of any other great ones that we could stock in our library? Or asking, school librarians, what are the kids really enjoying reading at the moment? Just connecting, which I think librarians do anyway, but I think that's the way to do it, is to, if you're on social media, also connecting with disabled creators or queer creators who are already putting the work out there, because often they'll recommend other work by other creators in their communities. So it's really just that networking and communicating with people who are already in that space.
And there are events. I mean, I know we've had difficult few years, and so that's been patchy in certain parts of Australia especially, but like here in Perth, we've been pretty lucky. And so there's a lot of things, like whether it's a zine fair or whether it's we have the local Perth Comic Arts Festival every year. These are such good places. And it'd be so encouraging actually to see people from libraries coming and having a peek to see what there are local vendors are selling. And you'd be surprised at how much amazing kind of talent and interest is out there. And it also kind of coalesces the communities, like makes those networks, rather than keeping those individual makers or independent makers in this narrow margin on the side, when they're not part of all these mainstream advertising campaigns and even just word of mouth spread. So I think that's really amazing. And there are opportunities for that, and I think CBCA is slowly picking up graphic novels too. And there's I know that events lead to other events, and so I think that's encouraging. But definitely there's some really cool stuff. And I think I would also suggest, really be surprised, like try to even Google something like strange graphic novels or unusual graphic novels. It's so interesting how people are still inventing new ways to tell stories with visuals and words, how there's new approaches, even if it's just like a one book gimmick. My jaw never stops dropping, and how slow some comics can be. Like I love slow comics, where you'd say, well, nothing happened for 200 pages, but everything happened at the same time. And that really makes people appreciate the craft. And I think it's nice to try different things, rather I know there are people who love particular genres and that's great, but just try something different. See if you can completely go sideways and maybe just Google horror graphic novel or toxic relationship graphic novel. There's so many interesting things. And then on top of that, there's all these, I think they're called pathobiographies, where people write first-hand experiences of certain illnesses or, surviving with who has a particular condition. And those things are now being picked up in certain nursing and medical courses because they help these medical practitioners have empathy for the condition they're going to be treating, rather than you looking at it as a machine that needs to be fixed. So there's like, I just think there's so many resources where you can actually go that might be surprising, where you can find lists of things to include.
I love it when libraries have like a zine display too, and there are so many great workshops happening in libraries with helping people make their own zines, and I think that encourages a kind of appreciation of visual art and comics and graphic novels, just to get kids kind of making zines and reading zines, and adults too. So I'd love to see more zines in libraries.
So coming back towards the book, one of the things that we hear is Maisie idolizes the character of Nightshade, and Ollie the same with Asterion. Who were the characters that you identified with and saw yourselves in growing up? So I know that Jess, you said that there weren't many, but did you have any?
I mean, the only amputees I can think of seeing when I was younger were maybe like Hook from Peter Pan, and Luke from Star Wars, and there's quite a few amputees in Star Wars. I don't think I really connected with any of them, because I don't think there was much of an effort to kind of reflect real disabled people's experiences in a lot of the stories I was seeing. So, there were lots of pirate jokes when I became an amputee as a kid. And I think that people kind of reflect back what they see in popular culture. So if there are a lot of amputees who are pirates in popular culture, then that is what people will think of when they see you. Or if there are a lot of kind of cyborgy humans, then you'll get called a robot kid, or and people think that it's kind of funny and cute to be kind of referencing those things, but if you get them over and over and over and over and over again, peg leg Jess and all that sort of thing, it's not cute. and I think that speaks to the lack of representation in the culture. So I can't really think of any good examples of representation for me as an amputee. Any really good examples of representation for me as a fat person, or any of my other disabilities like anxiety or panic attacks. All of these are kind of generally framed as negative things in popular culture. They're a character, if they have a disability, they're either a villain or they're a character to be pitied. But there are amazing examples out there now. So I think that kids these days have a much better chance of kind of finding themselves on the page or on the screen, and having someone to kind of aspire to be, or to look up to, or to be like. And I think also other people who haven't had that representation of disabled people before, who are not disabled, are getting a better idea of what our lives are like, of what queer lives are like, of what fat people's lives are like, and are then able to be respectful towards those people who have those attributes in real life. So it's getting better. It needs to be even better though.
And what about you, Aśka? Who were some of the characters that you saw that you could relate to growing up?
I think maybe always the outsiders. However, I was always really, now that I look back, I was always really excited at all the queer media that was slowly coming out in the 90s. And that's why probably I was drawn so much to like the European cinema. And I lived in a country town, and there was a subscription. I could go I could go and see an art film once a month in the cinema, and it was very exciting. And there'd be like two people in the cinema, me and some old person. And I remember being like really interested, and I thought, it's just like a cool spin on a normal boring love story. But then I realized, no, there was much more there. Like I was actually very much interested in that representation, because as a kid, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but when I was really little, I aspired to be Rambo, which is basically cut out tough guy. Like, what a great way to be, never think, never question, never worry about anything, and you always win, right? And then, of course, I realized as I grew up that that's a terrible thing to aspire to. And that came out of lack of other people who maybe were as not defined, whether it's, their gender or their sexual orientation or even the identity. Like, I think I still am confused about my identity fundamentally, and there was never anything like that. So I just wanted to make a really, really strong identity for myself, and Rambo seemed perfect for that. So yes, I think I'm so glad when I see that so much out there right now for a young person to see and go, wow, look at this amazing spectrum of things I could be part of. It's not like I'm just a strange person in a dark cupboard. And you know, I have to go to that cinema with the one other person to watch something that vaguely resembles what I'm interested in. Yeah.
I get a little bit frustrated when I see like older classics being recommended to kids, because I know that there are some great classics, and that people often want to recommend the things that they loved when they were kids. But because so much has changed in such a short time, I really feel the emphasis should be on, you know, getting those more recent books into kids' hands, because it's kind of reflecting the world back a little better, I think, than the stuff that I grew up with. So of course there are special magical kind of books that, you know, will always be relevant to people. But yeah, there's just been such an explosion of diversity in books for kids, and it's really, yeah, it makes me feel really hopeful when I see those books being kind of celebrated and recommended.
That's great. So one of the things that comes from this identification and all this that we see in the book is creating fan fiction, and there's a whole big section where Maisie and Ollie work together to make a fan fiction story involving Nightshade and Asterion. What are your views on fan fiction and other fan created works, and what would you say to people who want to try writing fan fiction, or who are already writing fan fiction, maybe want to take it to the next level?
It's amazing. It's this whole amazing world of writing, and so many young people take part in it, and that's how they show their love for their show or their book that they're really into. And it's also where I first found queer stories, because people were taking those very non-queer TV shows and books and just doing what they needed. They absolutely needed that representation. So for a long time, that's where you found it, and that's certainly where I found it. I remember when I met my partner, you know, in the dark ages when I was 18, and she gave me this printed out display folder of a really great story with queer characters that she'd printed out and carefully put into this beautiful folder, and said, you should read this story. And that was my first experience with fanfic at 18, and it was just like, oh wow, these stories exist. So that's probably, yeah, why I love it so much, because I think it's a space where people make happen what needs to happen. And finally, those people that have kind of read those stories or written those fanfic stories are kind of becoming creators in the mainstream. And I think a lot of them probably got their first story writing chops or read their first stories with great representation in that fan space. So I love it.
Aśka?
I don't have much experience with it. I mean, maybe when I was Maisie's and Ollie's age, I would draw characters from, you know, Marvel and DC Comics to kind of learn to get a grasp of the movement. But then very quickly I became disillusioned by how unrealistic they all looked and started drawing my own versions of them in that style. So, you know, the comic, they would look Marvel-like with the color and bold lines, but there would be like, I don't know, guys kissing with a balloon, you know, strange things. But it was so I guess that maybe that's kind of a fun fiction that I never realized I was doing. Yeah. But yeah, there's in terms of, you know, TV shows and things I followed, yeah, it's a cool way to make your character live on beyond the book or the film you've seen, and, you know, keep them with you for longer, which is sad when the book ends and don't get to hang out with them.
Yeah, there's always that horrible feeling when a book or movie that you really love ends and you're like, no. So the fan fiction, you know, prevents you from feeling that for too long. You're like, I'm just going to write the next chapter.
That's it.
Yeah.
So coming towards the end, Aśka, you've said before that you believe visual literacy is a particularly important skill in today's world. What is it, and why is it so important?
So I guess visual literacy is literacy, but I would also almost argue that it's multimodal literacy, which is what comics do so well, where you put together various types of language to create meaning. In today's world, all of our data is coming from screens, whether it's your laptop or your phone or your iPad, and that is always a soundbite, like a little headline with visual, with maybe a little animation. And what the visual does is it goes through the back of your head rather than the frontal cortex. So you don't really inspect it in the same way as you do words. And it creates a feeling straight away, like in a split second before you even read the headline. And with that feeling, with that primed emotional backing, you then receive the information. So what I'm trying to say is all the information we're getting has a particular agenda to it. And if we are not able to critically assess that, because we're not taught to go, hey, there's an image there, I should probably think about who made it and why. It's not really a natural instinct unless you're taught that in school. You will succumb to these forces around you, to your bubble, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, your bubble information, which tells you how to feel about the next political election or climate change or the COVID vaccine. And you have these strong feelings. Feelings are very hard to change. When someone says, I feel really angry about this, you can't really reason with the person and tell them, well, these are the reasons why, maybe you shouldn't be so worried, because the emotional part of what their conviction is so strong. And images do that. So images used in a particular way are amazing manipulative tools, and advertising has known this, for decades. So I think, that's one of the main reasons why we should be taking visual literacy really important, because in today's world, there is very little text-based information. Most of it is just quick, fast, and emotional. So we should be able to at least navigate through that space. But of course, another side of it is that there's just the joyful world of storytelling there. When you think about comics alone and what they do with the image, with the symbolism, with the layout, design, with the emotional kind of cues the character is giving, and of course then the text, and you're putting that all together in your head at once to make the story. I mean, it's beautiful. So making, just like just mentioned before, making is a really big part of understanding. So if you have a go at making it, then you start to understand how the mechanics work, and that's, it takes you from there. So, yeah, I think I kind of answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's good. It sounds one of the things that gets talked about a lot in libraries is information literacy, and it really sounds like that there's a lot that you see tied in with that visual literacy as well as textual literacy and all of this that can really help develop those critical information literacy skills really well. So yeah, it's really interesting. Let's try and end on a bit more of a fun note than advertisers manipulating us and everything. One of the things with that I liked in the book, and that I know a lot of librarians really like, pins and badges. And this is something you see at a lot of cons. This is something that there are plenty of pins and badges in the story. In fact, most of the chapter intro pages have a badge, a pin or a badge or something in them as well. So are any of those pins and badges in there like that real? Are they based on real ones that you've seen? Do either of you collect them? And if so, do you have favorites that you want to share?
Yes, you go. Can you?
Sorry, I do have some pins and badges that I've collected over time. Probably my favorite one is a little Totoro one that I have that's actually fuzzy. And I've got a couple of different Totoro badges, and I'm a huge fan of Totoro and Ponyo and Hayao Miyazaki movies. So yeah, and I have some Steven Universe ones as well, and I really love those. But the badges are all Aśka, and that is something I never imagined. They were so beautiful. Like when I saw them, I was just like, oh my goodness. and then Aśka sent me the badges in real life, and it was the most amazing thing. I was like, oh my God, they're real. And actually, the librarian at Pakenham Library, when we were doing our launch, was like, where did you get these badges from, and where can I find some? So yeah, Yeah, I'd love to know more about whether Ash is going to make them more widely available, because I feel like a lot of librarians and just a lot of readers who like the book would love to get their hands on those badges. They're amazing.
But
I have them up next to my bed. They're so cool.
But it was Jess originally, who had that scene in the manuscript where Joe buys Maisie those badges when Maisie gets overwhelmed by the con, and there was particular things you kind of suggested to have on the badges.
Oh, like, I'd forgotten that.
Those few little one-liners. And so I started there, and then when I was designing the book, that's when I got the idea for the Polaroid and the badge at every setup of the chapter. So there's no people in them, but they give you the mood. And then later it just made sense to make them. And I did Google a lot of different badges at the time to get the sense of what was out there. And a lot of them maybe are a mix of things that is out there, but no, they're not really copies of anything, because it's copyright and stuff. You have to be careful. But yeah, I had a real fun researching all that stuff. And then I was really lucky that my friend had a badge making machine, so all I had to buy was just the actual backings, and I went nuts. I had like 200 badges in a few months, and it's so much fun. I have a color printer at home, so there's no limit to badge making, one-off badge making all time. But I'm not sure. Maybe in the future it will be available. But I definitely have a whole bag of them still here, and it's been a joy. And they definitely sold well at cons and things. So they live on. The book lives out there.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, if you do end up making them, I'm definitely putting my hand up for some. So to finish up, we always ask the people who we chat with, what are 3 comics or graphic novels that you've enjoyed recently and that you would encourage others to check out? So I don't know who wants to go first with this. Jess, you were showing some before. Did you have?
I'm I have to choose. I've got maybe Aśka should go first, and then I can try and choose.
My favorite for ages and ages now. I love the Tamaki cousins, and of course I love Skim, and I love this one Summer. But I really like Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. So that's Mariko Tamaki and Valerie Rosemary O'Connor. Oh my gosh. Valerie has made that book this magical experience. Valerie is a comic maker who has got this most poetic approach to layout and design, and the book has so much space. So a lot of the pages or spreads will have just 1 or 2 speech bubbles, and everything else is just this amazingly curated and organized paneling and imagery that gives you all the senses you need. What this scene smells like and feels like and sounds like. I would really recommend looking at that book from a point of view of how it was composed. The story is really good too, but yeah, for me, what really makes it is Valerie's work. The other thing I love, Karol Novak, Girl Town, really great find. It was, I think it's kind of considered independent, really good set of short stories. And another comic maker who I absolutely adore is Eleanor Davis. So How to Be Happy. They all tend to be women comic makers, and I don't know, there's something really cool about the way these comic makers just approach comics. And as I said, from a slow point of view, they see something else in that medium, and the moments that they capture and freeze are just beautiful. They're like odes to our everyday lives, and with a bit of fantasy spin. So I would recommend to check them out.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
This is really hard. I'm going to go with this one first, The Cardboard Kingdom, by Chad Sell. And it's a really great book about a group of young kids who live on a street together, really diverse. It has a gender diverse character, which is really exciting for me. And it really makes me happy. So I bought this one kind of when my kids were a little bit younger, and I've been just waiting for them to kind of grow into the right age for this book, and we're finally here. So we've been enjoying this one and the follow-up, which is really, really great. There's a series by Molly Knox Ostertag, the Witch Boy series, again looking at gender and looking at kind of the stereotypical gender roles that we're kind of forced into, and how sometimes we need to break free of those. Lots of magic, which is kind of my jam as well. And oh no, I've got 2. I'm going to go with Nimona here because it has a disabled character, an amputee, who is just so lovely. And yeah, this is one of my favorites as well. I have like a little pile of Australian ones. Oh, there's so many things that I want to recommend. It's like my favorite thing to do. I have a whole workshop that I do sometimes with kids where it's literally just me for an hour going, you have to read this book and this book and this book. Yeah, so thank you for letting me recommend a couple. I'm just going to show this one on screen without saying anything. Just sneak you forth. That's it. I'll control myself.
Well, thank you. They all look great. I'm never sure if I like better when it's books that I know and read and have loved already, and I'm like, oh yes, someone else. Oh yes, like the Tea Dragon Society, and if it's someone else reading what I've already read and liked and going and they like it too, or if it's the ones that I'm like, oh, I don't know that one. I'll have to go and check it out. And I think you've managed to make me really interested in had a combination from both of you. Have had a combination of ones that I already knew and ones that I'm definitely going to check out now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today for this creator chat. What is the best way for people to keep updated on your projects and find out more about your work?
I live on Twitter, so you can find me there basically. I have an Instagram account, but I'm bad at it. So I have a Facebook, but I'm bad at that too. So find me on Twitter or my website.
Yeah, for me, it's Instagram, definitely. That's the most updated media, but I am updating my website, so it should be kind of interesting soon. I might even include a blog, which is revolutionary, where I talk about things rather than just show pictures.
Cool. And we'll try and make sure to get the details of that down in the description underneath. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
So Alia Graphic has her own website. It's aliagraphic.blogspot.com. You find us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and you can email us directly if you want to get involved. aliagraphicinfo@gmail.com. So yeah, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing more of your work and everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Yes.